Hey everybody, Jason here, and I'm back with a new video. And today I am here in Dresden, Ontario, Canada. And behind me here is the Josiah Museum, the Josiah Henson Museum of African Canadian History, formerly known as Uncle Tom's Cabin, but I'll get to that in a second. So why Dresden, Ontario? Well, this area here was a settlement for African people who were enslaved, who traveled up the Underground Railroad to this area. And one of those persons was a famous Canadian by the name of Josiah Henson, also known as Uncle Tom. He was born in Maryland in, I believe, sometime in the late 1700s, into slavery. And I believe the story goes he tried to buy his freedom, but he was treated cruelly as a slave. Tried to buy his freedom, but he was double-crossed by his owners or slave masters. So he decided to travel from Louisiana, where he was sent to or relocated to via the Underground Railroad to Canada for his freedom. And once he arrived here, he actually traveled the Underground Railroad in reverse and freed approximately 200 Africans as a quote-unquote conductor of the Underground Railroad. And he founded the British American Institute, which was one of the first vocational schools that taught the production in sawmills and different industries, which basically taught industrial work for mostly freed Africans from the United States to work in sawmills, but also science and technology. And he also established the Dawn Colony. So basically it was a settlement, and this is in French here. It's basically a settlement for that surrounded his British American Institute. So Mr. Henson was one of the famous Canadians of his time, and he inspired Harriet Stowe, a novel writer, to write a novel by the name of Uncle Tom's Cabin, one of the most famous literary works of his time, and brought Josiah Henson into international fame. And it did so by really telling his life story. It was basically based off his autobiography, and it showcased Mr. Henson, or Uncle Tom, as a compassionate person who that put Canada on the map as a place or a haven for freedom, for free slaves, and his work in Underground Railroad. And it exposed a lot of the atrocities of slavery at that time. And so this place used to be called Uncle Tom's Cabin Museum, but it was renamed as the, as I mentioned before, the Josiah Henson Museum of African Canadian History. So in a little bit, I'll get into one of the reasons why they changed that name. But let's go inside the museum and take a look around and check it out. And that's Mr. Josiah Henson himself, along with his wife, in Glasgow, Scotland, 1877. So this is the bookstore, or so when you come here, it's partially a guided tour. So we're gonna do a guided tour, and then show us a bit around on sites. And there's like the indoor part, the Freedom Gallery, and then there's some sites outside of the building, including the actual cabin itself. I think there's a church, the place where Josiah lived, since this was his property as well. So I'm going to join the tour in a second. Canada is known as being the last stop on the Underground Railroad and a destination for freedom.
That didn't hear me say this already, that Josiah Henson said, "I'll use my freedom well," when he came here to Canada. And that's why we renamed the road Freedom Road. And I did say he didn't learn to read and write. This looks like a contradiction, but once they came to freedom, his older son, Tom, by coincidence his name was Tom, he taught his father how to sign his own signature. So this came from his last will and testament. Now,
The actual routes here from throughout the South up into to Canada. It'll always be a source of fascination to me how thousands of slaves, uneducated slaves, were able to traverse a huge plot of land in order to find this area where they needed their freedom. And it says here, "I knew the North Star." So it had to have been some forms of astrology and navigation used in order to navigate like such a huge area. He was born into slavery in Maryland, 1796. So I heard about this. He was actually tortured through lashes, 100 lashes. He had his ear cut off. Wife was raped. And his family was relocated. Like a lot of slaves were during that time. The family was basically relocated throughout parts of the South. Kentucky, New Orleans. And as I mentioned before, he arranged to travel back to Maryland to purchase his freedom. He actually raised money, $450, but he was illiterate and couldn't read the manumission papers, and he was cheated out of his freedom. So that's when he decided to escape. So this is the settlement that we're on, and I believe this is what these chairs here were actually hand carving in this settlement. Like this settlement, here's an illustration of it, was a institution. And I imagine maybe woodworking was a part of it, but you could touch it. But I think this was hand carved. These rocking chairs are actually hand carved on this settlement. Dresden, Ontario. So Henson and white abolitionists purchased 300 acres and opened the British American Institute. The institution was established to benefit black people, but did not exclude white or indigenous people. Oh, here we are. These black walnut chairs carved in a vernacular style are examples of work done by students at the British American Institute, where caning and chair making were taught. Black walnut trees. Here's some photos. Amazing. Big piece of black history, Canadian history. We don't get taught this in schools. I frankly barely heard of Josiah Henson, but These were the directors of this institution. It was an executive committee, just like any other university. And here are some famous black abolitionists. Y'all know Harriet Tubman, Josiah Henson, Henry Bibb, Samuel Ringgold, Alston Stewart. Refugees from Canada, from slavery in Canada, never forgot loved ones they left behind. Josiah and Charlotte Henson lost one son, sold south before they fled to Canada. He remarried. It was illegal to recruit troops for foreign armies while living on British soil. Josiah Henson was charged with convincing African Canadians to join Union forces, but was acquitted. After President Lincoln announced enlistments of black troops, Josiah's eldest son, Thomas, slipped out of San Francisco's man of war. He was presumed dead. Former curator of Uncle Tom Cabin Museum, Jack Thompson, mounts the crown on Henson's tombstone while the great-grandchildren of Henson look on. Here's the original edition of Josiah Henson's autobiography, which was published in 1849. And here is a early edition of Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Uncle Tom's story of his life. All right, so let's go out. Let's go outside now, and we're gonna check out the rest of the property. His living quarters, cemetery, the church, a lot of other good stuff, but a lot of wealth of information in the indoor part here. And there's also a film that they're gonna show, which I'll look at later.
He's just like his dad.
So this house belonged to, as she was telling us, James Harris, who was one of the descendants of the Africans that came here. Ooh, this is the house in 1993. It was reconstructed, but it was built by one of the Africans that was formerly enslaved. And here, you tell it has like one window because that's how some of the houses were constructed down south. But oh, this is the rope.
Mm-hmm. That's the rope bed.
If I can lift the,
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
It's pretty. So there was no mattress.
No, it's just like this ticking thing. Like
Right.
This.
Okay.
It was underneath and
Instead
the
of-
quilt on top.
Right.
So night, sleep tight.
Night, sleep tight.
Yeah, you need to learn these things, don't you think like that? So I want to,
So
yeah.
It's actually pretty comfy in here. Heat up the fireplace and it can warm up pretty good. There's an upstairs too. We can't go up there because, oh man. So this here is a smokehouse made from a sycamore tree. So sort of a fireplace. And here's the famous sawmill. This was a big part of the institution. Was learning how to operate sawmills and cut down trees and saw trees and things of that nature. And there's a big old saw.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty well preserved. So this is the last resident of Josiah Henson and his second wife. So this is Uncle Tom's cabin, or what's referred to as Uncle Tom's cabin. It was actually relocated here from Dresden on a flatbed in 1964 and reinstalled here. But this is the actual home. Here's the life-sized figures of Josiah Henson and his wife. There's an upstairs. Can't really see, but so this would be the kitchen and the dining room. Oh, that's the clock. Is that time right? No, it's not 3. So this is a home in the 1800s. You got your cooking stove here. You can imagine how cold the Canadian winters could be and just how you gotta kind of survive in this climate. But the wood doors. It's kind of this larger Ontario area between here and Toronto, including Windsor, and the towns and settlements in the area. So let's go inside the church. Oh man, this is one of those original heaters. London, Ontario. I wonder if these are the original chairs. This is the organ, please do not touch. And the pulpit. And imagine that he actually spoke at this pulpit. I guess I could stand up here. Imagine giving a sermon. So I was told that before COVID, people would actually do weddings and have events here that they can give us donation to the institution and or the museum, and people could have their wedding here in the very church that Mr. Henson actually preached at, which would be pretty cool. I can see some of the Negro spirituals. I'm not going to actually touch the thing, but woke up this morning, swing low, sweet chariot, amazing grace, wade in the water. So let's go over to the cemetery. So although there are only a few headstones, there's actually over 300 bodies in the cemetery. Some of the people that were involved in the institution and family members of the British American Institution were buried here. And there was a cemetery also closer to the river further down, and the bodies were relocated and placed in the cemetery here. So I think this is the original headstone. Well, this is Mr. Henson's headstone. Actually, right off here on the, I think this is Freedom Parkway here. Actually, there's some more headstones across the road here. But this is Josiah Henson's headstone. Born May 6, 1883. Died in 1888. Born July 1789. So 93 years old. The novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. Henson's celebrity raised international awareness of Canada as a haven for refugees from slavery. So this property here is managed by the National Historic Museum, so this place is actually owned and managed by the Canadian national government. So it's a important part of Canadian history as well. These are some more newer headstones here. Let's go across the street. The British American Institute Cemetery. I think this is where they most likely relocated from the older cemetery. So you can see how old these headstones are. I think some of them, these were the ones that were actually made of stone, and the ones that were made of wood probably, so these are the plots here. Died 1896, 1866, 1874. See, these were all members of the Institute, family members of the Institute, important people of the institution that died, and their headstones were. So what it looks like is that most of the the buildings that were preserved were kind of brought here and placed in this area for display and to be showcased, but the actual institution or the school probably, it did include, hectares of land. This whole land, this area here was just preserved for showcase. So, before I end, I want to get into the actual name change of the institution. It was previously called Uncle Tom's Cabin Museum, but as you know, Uncle Tom has sort of a negative connotation to it, and that is because when the very popular novel was released, Uncle Tom's Cabin, you can imagine it upset a lot of slave owners in the United States because the brutality and the inhumanity of slavery was being exposed in this novel. So Uncle Tom, this character of grace and compassion and intelligence, was reinterpreted or reappropriated to mean this sort of buffoon, docile person who was compassionate towards the slave masters or race trader. He would reject his own kind and loving to the slave master, and all these negative adjectives that we associate with the word Uncle Tom, and they were often performed in minstrel shows as the character Uncle Tom. So they would have minstrel shows and things like that. So throughout history, Uncle Tom, the meaning of the term was derogatory. So, which is quite fascinating because previous to that, internationally known, Uncle Tom was a famous person. He was a famous abolitionist for slavery. And I didn't know this. I use the term Uncle Tom all the time. And so I think relatively recently, they changed the name to the Josiah Henson Museum because, I don't know, maybe more so in the United States, they realize words have power. And, that term is sort of used still in a derogatory fashion. So they wanted to change the name to reflect the history and the importance of the man himself and his history and what he was about. And in doing so, I think, it kind of paints a broader history, a broader picture of not just Josiah Henson, but the whole abolitionist movement. So, I think that's more attractive than Uncle Tom's Cabin Museum, because you don't really know, like, okay, well, what is Uncle Tom's Cabin? If you hadn't read the novel, this is more a Canadian history thing than it is, well, I won't say it's more Canadian than American, but I think this is a better fit name for the museum. So definitely worth checking out if you're here. I actually drove here from the States. It's about an hour and a half away from Detroit. Definitely worth a visit. The tour was awesome, very detailed, and you can tell it's kind of out in the middle of farmland, but worth traveling to. I've been to a lot of slavery museums. I have to say, this story is just quite fascinating. It's just really, really fascinating. Like, if you don't know about Josiah Henson, read up on him, visit the museum. I'm gonna order Uncle Tom's Cabin and actually read the book. And this is an educational experience for me because I got to learn how language and words are reinterpreted to mean something totally different. So it's the importance of learning your history, because I didn't know who Uncle Tom was. I didn't know anything about Uncle Tom, and for someone who didn't know how to read or write to come here to carry his family on his back and create a whole institution, a school for science and technology in the 1800s, and to become world renowned and meet Queen Victoria of England and all these different things is quite fascinating. Just quite fascinating. So thanks for watching. Hope you come visit this place one time if you get a chance, and see you in the next video.
But they did it in professional capacity in a local theatre, and artistic directors was in his 40s. Well, I said,
So I'm gonna sit here and watch this film.